This is me smiling. I have to force myself to smile. It's not that I'm unhappy. I'm actually doing fine, but I don't smile as big as I think I do. I think I'm smiling, and then I see myself on video, and I'm going, "Oh, I'm not. I just look like I'm trying to suppress a burp or something." I don't know what that is, but I have to do it, especially for commercial auditions. You become very aware of yourself when you see yourself on film and in photographs, which is a big thing with me right now. I picked up an acting gig during the week. Yes, I did. On Tuesday, I got the phone call while I was ordering a pumpkin spice latte at a Starbucks in Silver Lake, which, yeah, your boy has turned into a cliche. That's when it happened. That's when I got the call from my agent saying, "Hey, you got this gig." So I did this thing on Wednesday. It was fun. Can't say what it is. Again, another kind of slightly jerky cliche thing, but you can't really talk about it. I don't know. I just want to keep everything a big secret, so I'm not talking about it. When it's going, which should be in December, I will tell people about it. But that was a thing. Wednesday. Thursday was my birthday. I enjoyed Wednesday more because then I got this gig, and then I went and did a nice comedy set that night at Mike Perkins' Another Late Show Tonight here in North Hollywood. That was cool. He does that show once a month. Check it out. It's a fun time. And I was in the moment because the audience was filled with a bunch of people who just came to see their friend, a bunch of 20-somethings, seeing their friend do stand-up for the first time. And then I get up there, and they were a little rowdy. They weren't quite right for a typical stand-up comedy audience, but I rolled with it. I lived with the uncertainty, and I rolled with it, and I thrived in it. And then Friday night, I'm just living my life. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not bothering no one. And then I get a phone call from a guy I've worked with for these murder mystery shows. You know these parties where there's a murder mystery and everyone's a suspect? I've started doing those now. And this guy said, "Hey, client came through on short notice. Can you do a murder mystery party with me tomorrow?" Meaning Saturday. Saturday, relative to the phone call that I got Friday. But I'm saying this to you on Sunday. So it was just yesterday. And I said, "Yeah, I can do it." Because I didn't have anything going on and I really shouldn't turn down work. So I went ahead and did it. And it turned out fine. It turned out fine. Yeah, I was supposed to play two characters. The first one gets killed, and the second one comes back as the twin brother. So I came up with a costume, and what do you think happens? I left the costume at home. So I drive all the way there, and I don't have the costume, and I kind of lose my shit. I really got furious. I was furious with myself, and I'm furious because I'm out of control. I'm doing too many things at once. I got a job here, a gig there, the bop up and the bip and the bop and the bip, and I got a bang bang there and a bip bop boom. And I'm trying to figure it out, and I can't keep track of all this stuff. This is a new lifestyle that I'm trying to live, and I got to figure out how to keep track of this stuff better, and it's really difficult. And then Jason, really cool cat, said, "It's okay, man. It's okay. We can make a joke out of it. I mean, you have the leather jacket. You can just wear the leather jacket. You can wear the same pants and the same shoes. You can say twins, twin brothers. You know, we dress alike. What do you want?" It turns into a joke. Audiences love that stuff. And you know what? It wasn't an issue. Of course, it wasn't an issue. It didn't really matter. I just flipped out because I was mad at myself because I lost control of something. I'm losing control of things. But the big lesson here is living with uncertainty. That's what I got to learn how to do. And I'm getting better at it. Last night, okay, not so much. But generally, I'm getting better at it. Which leads me to my guest this week, O.M.G. The Honorable Sunil Sabharwal. This guy, talk about living with uncertainty. He fled communist Hungary in the 80s when he was a teenager. And that should be a movie. Talk about scary. Talk about divergent paths in life. He was, this close to either getting freedom or ending up in prison. And that's what he and his mother did. We're like, okay, this is the choice we're making. And that's what happened. And he made it. He got out of communist Hungary and then went back because during the rebuilding, he had the background. He knew how to speak the language. He knew the culture. And by then he had degrees in finance. So they're like, this guy, we need him. So he went back and helped with the economic redevelopment of Hungary, which was a big thing after the Soviet Union fell. There were all these countries going, we need help. What do we do? And that's where people like Sunil came in. And he also ended up as a member of the International Monetary Fund. He was on the board. I think he was the alternate executive director. Forgive me, I don't know this off the top of my head. And he had to be confirmed by the Senate. Yeah, right? That's how important this guy is. And he had this parallel life in athletics. He was an expert fencer in college. and he has served on boards of the International Olympic Committee. And he's just lived one of those lives where his skill set and circumstance all line up, and he has all these opportunities. So please enjoy this interview, which we did at my friend Ildiko Tabori's house. You remember Ildi? I interviewed her a few episodes ago. Sunil is Ildi's brother-in-law. Small world, right? And he was in town. He's a very hard guy to get a hold of. He's very busy and important, as you can imagine. So he's in town, and Ildi says, well, come on over. You can just do it at my place. So instead of the split screen where I'm in my home and the other person is wherever they are, we did the whole thing right there in Ildi's den, which was awfully nice of her. And you'll notice a jump cut at one point because we ordered dinner, and then the dog left. So that's why that is. Now, that's all my very long way of saying please enjoy this interview with the Honorable Sunil Sabharwal.
I know you fled communist Hungary, and that's quite a story. And I'd like to know how that informed your decisions to make the choices you made in life. Like, did you always wanted to get into business and finance, or did fleeing, for your life inform your decisions? And
well, fleeing Hungary really was the second time I migrated, kind of, because I was born in New Delhi, India, to an Indian dad and a Hungarian mom. And when I was 9, my parents separated, and I moved with my Hungarian mother to Budapest. So, age of 9, and from India to communist Hungary. So you can imagine the cultural difference in the late 60s, early 70s, from India to communist Hungary. You could just imagine that. And then when I was 18, so 9 years later, that's when we defected Hungary, again, with my mom. She was the instigator, if you like, or she took the initiative, and we can all be very thankful to her, my brother and I, because it was her, my brother and I, who left the country, and that was illegal at the time. So there was no way to just immigrate.
Well,
right?
Of course,
so
it's defecting. You have to step down.
So we had to defect, and largely that was driven by my mom never was comfortable with the communist regime, and maybe in the depth of her heart, maybe that's why she got married to an Indian. It's kind of an escape, but then the marriage didn't work out, so she was back, and then she figured out that is still not working for her. So we all then went, and it was an elaborate 12-month scheme where we had to keep it all in secret from our closest friends and family. We sold a house, we sold a car, we sold other valuable belongings, and the cash was being collected at a friend's business in Vienna. And then I graduated, and then summer of 1983, we all got on to a bus, like an organized tour. That's how you could leave Hungary to go to the West. So went to Austria on a 3-day bus tour, and it happened to coincide with the fencing world championships that were being held and I was a fencer.
You were fencing
so it was one of these package tours, a bus full of tourists, and we had so much stuff with us for a 3-day tour. My winter coats. This was July '83. I brought my fencing equipment. My brother brought his guitar. My mother had a lot of gold from her Indian in India. That's what you get when you get married, and as gifts, a lot of gold. And I think one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life was when, of course, the bus goes up to the border. There's a passport check and customs control, and the customs officer came up on the bus, which was full, 40 people, and looked down the list of passengers on the bus, and he was just going to spot check a few. So he called out a few last names, whose luggage he was going to spot check. And if either one of us would have been caught out, we might be then still sitting in jail, because it was obvious that we were not leaving for a 3-day tour,
Yes.
but for something much more extensive. So that was a big risk taken. It worked out, and that's how we arrived in Vienna.
So that's how you got to Vienna, and from there you eventually made your way to Ohio. Now, did you know somebody to help sponsor you, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so we arrived in Vienna. We did the sightseeing tour and went to the fencing world championships, where a friend of mine was competing on the Hungarian team. And then when it was time for the bus to return, we never returned onto the bus. And we went on to register at the U.S. Embassy in Vienna seeking political asylum. And this was in the time of the Soviet Empire, and there was a regular fleeing of people from the Soviet bloc countries. So there was a system set up for people like us. And they housed us actually in a beautiful little hotel outside of town, and about 100 miles from Vienna, where we waited for all the paperwork to come through, and that took about 6 months. And the way the process works is you declare which country you want to go to, and there's probably half a dozen countries: Canada, USA, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Sweden. Some people wanted to stay in Vienna. There was a system actually set up by the United Nations which dealt with all these political refugees, and we were one of those, and we indicated an interest in the United States, and then they searched within the United States, and then we were matched up by a church out of Columbus, Ohio, the Upper Arlington Lutheran Church. This took about 6 months, and we, of course, didn't know where Columbus was, so we had to kind of look it up on the map, and then found Ohio, found Columbus. Cleveland was a well-known town in Eastern Europe and in Hungary, because there are a lot of Ethiopian immigrants that had gone there, I guess, during the steel industry and all that. But Columbus was unknown to us. But they said, okay, you're off to Columbus, Ohio, if you so like. And just a couple of days before Christmas of '83, we got on a plane to go to New York, eventually arriving in Columbus.
Wow. Now what a huge culture shock for someone. So you're 18 at the time.
Correct.
So you've gone from India to Hungary, and now you have to flee Hungary, fearing for your lives, and now you end up in the United States. Now, how good was did you know anybody at all? How good was your English? Did you have college prospects? What do you do at that point?
Yeah, so I guess we were fortunate in a sense that we spoke English, partly because of the Indian impact. So, we went to English schools. My brother and I, my mom spoke it, obviously. And then in Hungary, my elementary and high school had English. So actually, English had been with me from birth, really. So that was easier than, let's say, for most refugees. I had an uncle from the Indian side who were in Louisville, Kentucky. And so that was relatively close. But other than that, we didn't know anyone in Columbus. Our sponsors, the Upper Arlington Lutheran Church, then designated a couple, Professor Cole and Edie Cole, who became our personal sponsors. Professor Cole was a finance professor at the Ohio State University. And when we arrived in Columbus, the day before Christmas, the local paper, Columbus Dispatch, ran a half-page article on the family with a photo. Yeah, I guess Columbus was big town, but not that big. This was news there.
Mm-hmm.
The church was an influential part of the community. So they got a little story in about us. And one thing led to another. And the fencing coach at Ohio State found out that there was a Hungarian fencer in town. And at the time, the level of fencing between Hungary and the United States was tilted in favor of Hungary to a large degree. Not today anymore, but at the time, yes.
So this coach finds out this
So this
Hungarian
coach
fencer.
that.
He's
So
thrilled.
the coach tracks me down, beginning of January, literally knocks on our door. I happen to open the door, and in her very heavy Hungarian accent, she says, "Sunil, you come with me now." And a week later, I'm enrolled at Ohio State. And Ohio State was in a quarter system at the time. So January was the beginning of the second quarter, winter quarter, as opposed to semesters. And that was actually the season for fencing. So I enrolled. The tuition, of course, as out-of-state residents, even though it was a state school, was tremendously high even then. So it's not something I could have afforded, or we could have afforded. And Professor Cole wrote out the first check for me to attend Ohio State as an out-of-state student. And then a couple of weeks later, we had the Junior Olympics, where I took second, and we had the Big Ten, which I won my freshman year.
Freshman.
And yes, and then, I became a kind of an overnight celebrity on campus. I had good grades, so after that, the money started flowing.
Now, what does that mean when the money started flowing?
Well, that meant scholarships and financial aid and all of that.
Nice.
So the bridging came from Professor Cole, who, by the way, just passed away, and I attended back at Ohio State his memorial service. I was asked to speak at that just a few weeks ago. And so that's how I got integrated into Columbus, Ohio.
Wow.
And the Ohio State University.
Wow. I mean, are you thanking your lucky stars at this point? Because you must be thinking a year ago, I could have ended up in a gulag.
Yes. This is I have to thank something above and beyond us and me for the series of events about escaping the worst of the risks and then arriving at a place. I failed to add, but the coach at the Ohio State University was a Hungarian lady. So there was even that, who left in '56, and a lot of Hungarians left at the time of the revolution. So it was just a strange set of coincidences that I'm ever grateful.
Oh, yeah. My God, especially to somebody who was born here and we're living our boring suburban existences. I mean, never think about this sort of thing. So, yeah, this is an amazing story. And then you ended up, your resume, I should have had this ready here, but it's on Wikipedia. That's how impressive this is. And it's one business venture after another that's so impressive. And so how did you get started? Did you get I presume, a bachelor's in business administration?
Yeah.
And then a master's?
No, not immediately. I got a bachelor's and I started working. While I was going to college, my mom and brother had moved out to LA, where we are.
Why did they move to Los Angeles?
My mom always wanted to be in California, in the warm. So once I got settled with university, she always had wanted to come here. So after we settled in Columbus, she came, and my brother followed. He was younger. I could have come, but I decided to stay because I had everything else in place with Ohio State. But I would come here for Christmas and summer. It kind of became home.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated, I looked for a job that brought me here for a period of time. And that was with GTE, the telecom sector, GTE California, and I worked in Thousand Oaks. So then I actually moved in with my mom. That was really nice, and then started working in Thousand Oaks with GTE, but always on the finance side. So it was in the telecom sector, but finance, marketing, business side of things. And that's when I kept fencing. So I was still fencing, even though I was done with collegiate fencing, and ended up meeting my wife in the fencing club, Gabrielle Tabori, whose sister's house we're sitting in right now. Here, the club was not too far away here from here in Culver City.
Now, how did you? Because what's amazing to me is you're not just a guy. Oh, he doesn't just work in business. I mean, the things on your Wikipedia page alone are stunning, and all these things. So because it obviously one thing led to another, but the big thing, this is shocking to me. You served as the USA board member to the International Monetary Fund, and you had to get confirmed by the U.S. Senate. You're the first guest I've ever had on my show who needed Senate confirmation. Now, modesty aside, that's pretty impressive. How does one get to a point where you get a job that needs Senate confirmation? And I know this is probably a lengthy story, so take your time. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. So as I said, I was in business and finance and happily working, but then the Berlin Wall fell down, right? And I became an American citizen. And as someone who had grown up in the region, spoke the language, Hungarian, Russian, because that was mandatory for us to study, I was recruited heavily to go back to the region to work.
Because a lot of the countries were trying to rebuild now that they were.
Well, all the countries were rebuilding, and also first of all, the international aid organizations, World Bank, the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, but also the large corporations for whom these markets were closed, starting from Ford and GM to all the appliances, all the technology companies. Everybody was looking at this massive market of Central Eastern Europe, which together with the Soviet Union, right, that's over 300 million people. That's the size of the EU. So all of this huge market opens up. So everybody's looking for talent that has the experience, and I'm one of those.
So you have a business degree, and you speak language, you understand the culture.
I basically returned to the region, spend 5 years with the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is the equivalent of the ADB for Asia, Asian Development Bank, or the Inter-American Development Bank for this region, and actually set up the office in Budapest. So I returned with the EBRD, go to headquarters in London. The then president of the EBRD was a very famous guy called Jacques Attali, who was François Mitterrand's personal assistant, and then the whole idea of the EBRD was his. He ended up becoming president, and when he found out that I spoke Hungarian, he immediately summoned me to go to Budapest and open up the office. So I returned to Hungary as an American and as the largest potential investor into the region, because the EBRD became, in its first few years of operations, the largest investor in the region.
Now, hang on a second. This is your first time back after the Soviet Union.
Correct.
What are you like shaking? Or
yes, I mean, crossing that border, that Austria-Hungary border, because I flew into Vienna with a rental car was quite not traumatic, but dramatic.
Well, yeah, but the entire apparatus of control is gone.
Exactly. And now you're going, all the wires are gone.
Yeah, what do we do?
There's still passport control, but very easy.
Yeah, of course. Now there's no Soviet Empire anymore, so it's just.
I have a dozen of my high school friends waiting for me at the hotel.
Oh yeah! Now all of a sudden you're thrust onto an international stage.
Yes.
And you're how old at this time?
I'm 28, and I opened the EBRD office with Jacques Attali and the finance minister and the central bank president. So yeah, I was thrust into the spotlight at a very young age, and meeting with bank presidents, leaders, CEOs of companies, and I guess that's partly what then leads to what we'll get to in a bit. But this immediate responsibility of launching something that needs to be ramped up very quickly is a fascinating experience. And it's in the first 2-3 years of our operations of the EBRD, Hungary actually becomes kind of the darling of Central Eastern Europe because it was the first country to privatize telecom, toll roads, energy, and so 50% of all the funding of the entire EBRD actually went to Hungary. And I take credit for that.
Yeah.
Having spent a few years back in Budapest, then I moved to London to the international headquarters of the EBRD. From there, I decided to go back into the corporate sector and joined GE Equity, private equity business of GE Capital, first as a responsibility for Central Eastern Europe, then more broadly for financial services, Europe-wide. Spent 7, 8, 9 years at GE. That was fascinating. Lots of deals. And I guess when you're in the deal business, you learn a lot about different countries where you're investing, different industries that you're investing in, different situations, board situations, and all that. And I happened to make a couple of investments which were in payments, transaction processing, remittances, and that's how I started what we would call today fintech, financial technology. The terminology didn't exist at the time, but CVC funded Euronet, for instance, a very large remittances company. Now, several $1 billion in value. Then at the time, it didn't have a single operations up and running. So the first $2 million came from us at GE. And then I joined another American company, First Data, Western Union, which is at the time a single company in Paris. So it went from Budapest to London to Paris, and that was a very nice place to spend a few years. I always spoke French because in fencing the language of officiating, refereeing is French. So I'd always had French with me, and I was also becoming a referee. As my fencing competitive career was basically winding down, I started becoming active as a referee. So I always spoke French, but those 2-3 years in Paris, of course, added. And then we decided it's time to come back to the US. And I still had a number of investments and engagements in Europe, so we couldn't quite come back here to California. And we just picked a place and moved to Washington, D.C.
Oh, there's a lot going on there.
And it was international, and we had the kids. And I, with my EBRD connections, I had some colleagues that have come back to the World Bank there that I have known. So we had a small group of acquaintances, friends. And when you arrive in D.C., it's really hard to escape the politics, right?
Yeah, I've been there. It's like show business in this town.
Yeah, exactly.
If you hang out at any Starbucks, they're going to be talking shop.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's how I got involved with the politics, if you will. Although I'm not a politician, have never been, but you have your own preferences and ideals, and I got involved with the Obama campaign, a little bit with the first one, but really with the second one, and also on the policy work. And given my background with international affairs, international finance, that was welcome by the campaign. And since it was a young president, he didn't have the hundreds and thousands of people over the decades that you see with some of the other older candidates. So it was a very welcoming team in terms of fresh new thinking. And that's how I got engaged with the campaign, ultimately leading to a request by the White House to be considered for the board position at the IMF.
Wow, that's amazing that the White House came to you and said, "Can you do this?"
Yeah, that's how it works. So whenever a new administration comes in, there's thousands of jobs to be filled, and I think there's about 1,000 of them, maybe a little less, that need a Senate confirmation. So of the maybe 10,000 jobs that they need to fill, the top 10% meet that, and this one requires a Senate confirmation, which is a very complicated process because first they, of course, look at your background, and then they go to a very detailed background investigation, FBI clearance, all of that. And it's only after that when the president then says, "I nominate so-and-so for such and such position." So at that point, you've cleared certain hurdles, but the major hurdles are still after that.
Now, it seems to me if they have to confirm this many people, they're not going to spend a lot of time on each person because that would take forever. So do they kind of rubber stamp it? Do the senators have staff that researches this stuff independently, and then they come to the senator and say, "He's cool, you can approve him"? How does that go?
I'm sure yes, so we meet with the senators' staffers, but also sometimes with the senators, but there still is at the committee level. So for instance, I have to go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. There's an actual hearing. You have to attend. There's an actual hearing.
And they ask you questions.
Yeah. So I sat in front of the senators, the whole Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Kind of like you see it on C-SPAN. You can actually watch me on C-SPAN.
Oh, they recorded this? It's archived?
Yeah. So I've sat there twice because the first time I was nominated, actually the timing ran out because it's every 2 years. So and then you get renominated. So I sat twice in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Did you meet Ted Cruz?
Ted Cruz? No, I did not meet Ted Cruz.
Because had I known, I was give him a piece of my mind. That guy.
I did not meet Ted Cruz, but the senators were well prepared, I would say. So they had their staffers behind them, but they were well prepared. They had some very relevant questions. I remember I was being asked about Ukraine, and then they vote you out of committee if you pass. Not everybody gets voted out. Sometimes it can become quite partisan. Some people get blocked by either the Democrats or the Republicans.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Or they put holds on you and you can't move on. Given my background of not being so political, I did get voted out of committee. That's the terminology. And was on the Senate floor for a vote. So then you get onto a schedule and you wait until the Senate Majority Leader schedules a time for a vote.
Oh my gosh.
And in my case, that happened. And once that goes through, then you're free to.
Okay, now I'm starting to understand why there are so many unfilled positions.
Yeah.
Because I get that some of it's necessary, but some of it seems really bureaucratic and overly political. But congratulations on being a board. You're the first International Monetary Fund employee I've ever met, let alone a board member. Now,
Thank you. And actually, we had two nominees for the Senate from the United States. We have two positions at the IMF. And actually, the other person did get dogged by the Republicans, regrettably, was for some things. But so as a result, I actually, on a formal basis, was the only confirmed representative during the 2 years when I was there.
This is way overdue. I toast you, sir. Well, it's pretty amazing stuff right there.
That's very nice.
Yeah, well, still. Yeah, you're welcome. This is good. It's a good Zinfandel from Moonstone. I share this, not for sale in stores. Yeah. I share it with people, worthy events, worthy people.
Right.
So, now what do you do like day to day as a board member, or did you do as a board member of the IMF? Is it 40 hours a week? Is it just meetings once in a while? Is it constant advisory? What
Yeah, very good question. So the IMF board meets 3 times a week. People are always stunned because when you say, I'm on the board, people say, once a quarter you show up.
Yeah, there's that perception as board members just smoking cigars.
But this is a full-time executive board that sits inside the IMF headquarters. So we meet 3 times a week. And then you say, what do you guys do at the IMF? So much. And the IMF reviews every country every year, practically every country every year, so-called Article 4 process. And it's like a macroeconomic health check of a country. And those get discussed at the board and formally adopted by the board. So a lot of the board meetings are about, take the Article 4 discussion on Colombia papers, and then we'll debate and then formally endorse the IMF recommendation for Colombia. So that's a big chunk of the work. And then, of course, there's a lot of work around any lending projects, right? So when those come up as new ones, to approve them, and also the monitoring of those need to be done periodically.
And I presume all the board members have a finance background, so they have a big world picture of, how worthy of a project is this, and does this need to be done first before we just approve all this money and so forth?
Yeah, actually, the board members come typically either from central banks or from ministries of finance. And in that sense, I was an exception, because I came from the private sector, although financial sector, but still the private sector. That's a unique feature of the U.S. Board seat. The interesting in this board for me was that with my financial technology background, actually it was very timely for me to be sitting around there, because some of the issues were related to financial technology matters, such as remittances. Remittances is a huge problem around the world in terms of costs. Remittances, what we mean is sending money cross-border, so sending money from the USA to Mexico,
okay,
or from the Middle East to the Philippines. And they are expensive, cumbersome, difficult, so because of the banking system, the correspondent banking system. So there's a lot of financial technology, innovative fintech companies that are trying to solve that. So the IMF was, of course, looking at this as a systemic issue, see how we could address it. And for that, my background was very helpful. It was also the time when the first discussions about digital currencies surfaced 5 years ago. Now you hear about crypto and central bank digital currency, CBDCs all the time. At the time, this was very new. Again, I was one of the very few on that board who had some experience with that. So I complemented that board composition quite well.
Wow. And what's impressive about your career is how it seems like you develop some sort of background or some sort of acumen in something, and then years later, all of a sudden, it coincides so nicely with some global need, like your background, just where you grew up, and all of a sudden, the Soviet Union crashes. Hey, who do we know who has a background in business and understands the culture here in Eastern Europe? And there you are. And then your fintech background just dovetails nicely into this need that the IMF has. Do you, not to take any, I don't mean this to take any credit away from all the work you've done, but it also seems like there's a certain level of coincidence that happens over the course of your life. Have you engineered every one of these things to happen, or are you just being yourself and studying what you want and doing the careers you want, and then, by the way, the universe is conspiring to need you desperately in these certain arenas?
Well, the first couple of moves I have to blame or give credit to my mother, of course, to India, to Hungary, Hungary to the US. So I was kind of tagging along to a 9-year-old and then an 18-year-old. So I can't take any credit for that. In terms of returning to Central Eastern Europe, I think I actually followed more my heart than my mind. I was looking to go back with friends, family, memories, and I thought I could help. I remembered that I was actually getting ready to go to law school. I applied to law schools. I got admitted to a number of very high-end law schools. But then this opportunity in Central Eastern Europe came, so I went. And that was a conscious decision. I took that instead of the legal career. Which one was better? No one would be able to tell. I don't spend time thinking about that.
It's probably best.
And yeah, there's no reason. And then the move from there, I think, from financial services to financial technology, that was, once you're in the business, you see that coming and your personal interests gravitate that way. And then coming to the IMF, I would say perhaps the White House in some way chose me because of that aspect. So a little bit of a differentiation from the macroeconomists. The IMF has hundreds of macroeconomists, PhD macroeconomists, so you don't really need another one. So it was actually very insightful, I would say, from the White House personnel to pick someone additive to what was there, and they enabled me to be there.
And we're going to close out because we have food coming soon. That's important, folks. We're going to stop and eat.
Indian
food. Good stuff. You picked it.
Yeah.
I got to get to this stuff about the Olympics. How did you get involved with the International Olympic Committee?
So that's almost a parallel life. Sports is a parallel life. So you heard about the financial and the professional life. And I also mentioned briefly the fencing.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, sports has been with me much longer than my professional life. I started fencing at the age of 9 in Hungary. It's pretty good. So, 3, 4 in the country, in the age group. Then in the U.S. collegiate system, again, one of the top fencers in the 4 years. And once I stopped fencing, I became an international referee, represented the U.S. for championships, World Cups, and somehow got involved with the leadership of sports, always as a volunteer. So I was elected. I was asked to join the board of USA Fencing. Then I was elected into the International Fencing Federation executive board from the FIE. And whilst I was at the EBRD doing development finance, we were the first bank that was looking at funding projects in a sustainable manner. So before each project, the EBRD would ask for an environmental audit or an environmental impact assessment. Audit if it's an existing facility, impact assessment if it's a new build. And I'm talking in 95, right? So this is a long time ago. Now it's every day. Then it was groundbreaking. And because of my background in looking at that, I'm not an environmentalist, but because as investors we have to look at that, I had a little bit of knowledge what investors, creditors look in that context. And with my sports and fencing background, a very good friend of mine, now friend, then someone a mentor, Paul Schmidt, Hungary's IOC member at the time. He was also Hungary's president of the National Olympic Committee. He was an Olympic champion fencer, so a lot of connectivity there. He said, Sunil, you are in both in business and in sports. I have just made chairman of the IOC's Environmental Commission. IOC president was Juan Antonio Samaranch at the time. Paul Schmidt chairman. and he asked me for some guidance how we could fund this committee. There was not some money, and I managed to get some funding from corporate sponsors into that commission. And with my knowledge, then they asked me to join that committee. The IOC Commission at the time, it was called Sports and Environment. Now it's called Sustainability and Legacy. It's now chaired by Prince Albert of Monaco, who's, as you know, is a major proponent of the environment. And so there began back in 2000 an Olympic career, which then ventured into a couple of other sports hats that I carry. I got involved with the International Fair Play Committee, which is a very interesting, unique organization created in the 60s by a few French tennis legends, and uniquely sits between both the UN and the Olympic system, because it was co-founded by UNESCO and the IOC, and rewards annually a great act of sportsmanship. And now we've started some educational programs, and I've been on the board, and now the Secretary General there for many years. I moved on from fencing, and most recently was asked to join the executive board of World Athletics, and that is the international federation, the global governing body, if you will, for the sport of track and field. And I'm involved with that. So I sometimes feel always spend more time with my sports hats on, which again are truly voluntary.
Well, yeah, but you know, it's very interesting you wrap up with that, because I'm sitting here thinking, how much of your career choices are choices and how much of them are things that happen to you? Because again, you say people find you. And this is another example of people finding you. You said, I somehow got involved with, that was how you began this story. It's just interesting. And again, I'm not saying this to take away any of your achievements, but it seems like a lot of powerful people find you. And they say, hey, Sunil, we need you for this. And do you turn down a lot of job offers and things?
Yeah, so yes, people find me. Perhaps word of mouth, I guess.
Well, yeah, people want to
talk to each other. I do turn down a lot of things, both on the sports side and on the business side, because you can't do everything.
Of course,
you have to be focused on a few good things. I guess what I do well, or what I've done well, is I keep in touch with people. So I have people calling me who worked for me back in the GE Capital days over 20 years ago, and I'm still in touch. Of course, high school friends, all those years in friends with, but in a professional sense, I keep in touch. And if I'm going to a city, I'll always think, well, there's 2 or 3 people who I haven't seen 10, 20 years, why don't I send them a note? And that keeps your relationships alive. So that's one advice I could give to people. And because people, you're always in their mind, and if they think about it, they come to you. And also, don't burn bridges. That's my other piece of advice. You won't agree on everything ever with everyone, but that's not to say that on a different matter you may not be on the same side. So you need to keep that link open. Keep your links open. Do you have
what goals are left? Is there anything in particular you want to do that you still haven't done that you've wanted to do for years?
It's a good question. I would like to. What's happening in the fintech sector today, with really we see a big shift happening in finance and financial infrastructure with distributed ledger technologies, DLT, blockchain, or simple language, although it's not quite the same. For the sake of simplicity, let's just say that. So DLT, blockchain technologies will transform a number of industries for the better. Record keeping, perhaps payment, healthcare provision, international aid. A lot of things can be transformed by the use of blockchain technology. So and one of those areas is so-called central bank issued digital currencies, which is the ability of central banks to issue digital currency, so a digital dollar, digital euro, digital peso. And that is an area that is fascinating to me. So I'd like to spend the next few years in seeing what kind of a role I can play in that, and bringing financial access to financial services really to everyone in the world, because by now everyone has a mobile phone, and people say that people are unbanked or underbanked, but actually with the mobile phone everybody can be banked, so you don't need a bank account. How do we then get the technologies out that truly everybody has access to financial services?
Wow, that's some lofty stuff there. I'm still, I made a joke once. I said the best way to understand blockchain is to read an article about it, and then you'll understand it even less. Because I find blockchain that's another thing entirely. The Honorable Sunil Sabharwal, thank you so much for your time. What a fascinating chat.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome. No, thanks. Next time I want to hear some stories about Olympians you've met. I'm sure you have with you.
Quite a few.
Next time. Thank you so much. Ciao, everybody.
Bye-bye.
How do we stop this?
Wow, that's some lofty stuff. That's what I said to him when he's talking about fintech, when he's talking about connecting the whole planet, because now so many of us have cell phones and making financial transactions easier. That's me just going, wow, that's some lofty stuff. I'm just like somebody out of Fargo. I just sort of, oh, that's lofty stuff there. Oh, you bought Hardee's. That's my favorite. Seriously? That's all I have to say about that? I don't know. Enough about me. Wasn't that impressive? Isn't he an impressive guy? And modest, too. Just he doesn't walk around with a swagger. It's like, hey, I'm on the International Olympic Committee. Hey, I'm on the IMF. But can I get a seat at the restaurant? No. He's just living his life. So I think that's the big takeaway here. Just live your life. Do the best you can. Network. Keep your eyes and ears open for opportunities. Don't be afraid to say no to some opportunities. I asked him that. He says he's got to turn down offers because, sure, a lot of people want his time. So there's an inspiration. Go off. Do something amazing.